My name is Eric Tonkery, Director of Marketing Education and Assistant Professor of Marketing at Rutgers Business School. Today it is my pleasure to welcome Associate Professor Rudi Leuschner to discuss his new paper titled Supply Chain Financing and Pandemic, Managing Cash Flows to Keep Firms and Their Value Networks Healthy. Welcome, Rudi.
Thank you so much, Eric. It's a pleasure to talk to you.
Yes, and so let's get started to talk to you about really the essence of what your paper is about. And first question I have for you is, what is supply chain financing?
Well, supply chain financing is a rather new topic in a still new area of supply chain management. So when we think about a supply chain, typically we have a network of companies. If we imagine maybe a manufacturer company has a set of suppliers, and those suppliers have suppliers of their own, and so on, and the supply chain really goes several tiers deep. And they also have customers, and maybe those customers have customers as well. And that is what we call the supply chain. It's a network of companies. Now, within that network of companies, we also have flows. We have flows of products, of course, and we also have flows of information. But there's a third flow that typically supply chain practitioners and supply chain academics have mostly ignored, and that is the flow of money. And supply chain financing generally picks up on the notion that supply chains have to be able to also consider how money is flowing through the supply chain in order to make sure the whole network functions properly.
And in your paper, you talk about the flow of payments and what occurs in the flow of payments. Can you explain for our audience what happens to that flow of payments?
Well, typically a company, when they buy something from a supplier, that supplier submits an invoice, assuming everything went well and the invoice gets approved. There is obviously a payment for those products and services that the supplier provided. Now, traditionally, there was always a little bit of a lag, and that lag, let's say, used to be 30 days because that was sort of a common payment term. Now, over the last 10 to 12 years, what we've seen, that time has increased across all industries. And we can actually track that by looking at a metric called days payable outstanding. So on average, how long does a company take to pay their bills? And days payable outstanding, or DPO, probably in the last decade has doubled, if not tripled, across all companies. Now, what that means is that suppliers have to wait 60 or 90 days until they get paid. And that is where some of the new tools are coming in, and they can make it so that the supplier receives payment much earlier than they would have otherwise, even before 30 days, way before. And it gives the customer or the buyer the flexibility to delay payment, in essence, hold on to their own cash a lot longer, which if we look sort of on a time scale, it means that I get to hold on to my cash a lot longer. I have more of it because I don't spend it as quickly. And it also means that the supplier gets paid quicker, so their cash balance increases at the same time. And so some of these tools have become a lot more important starting in 2020.
Can you elaborate a little more about what those tools are? And let's say if you look at, let me ask it this way. You know, prior to the pandemic, you know, I'm sure there were tools that traditional supply chain professionals were using that were perfectly suitable in a pre-pandemic or pre-crisis situation. How has the pandemic changed that dynamic in such a way that supply chain professionals thought, well, this is really insufficient for what I need to do. I need to really, wrap up my game, so to speak, because I'm dealing with a new paradigm where the old tools really are not going to be sufficient enough.
So one of the things that happened right around February, March 2020 was as companies started to see that there was something brewing on the horizon, and we saw places in China completely locked down, and we also saw delays mounting on raw materials that companies in the U.S. would order. The first thing that they thought of was to make sure that we don't interrupt the flow of finances. So if I'm a company and it's February, March 2020, the first thing that I want to do is ensure that I get as much cash into my bank accounts as possible. Because I don't know if this possible thing that is coming towards us isn't going to leave us like what the Great Recession in 2008 left us with, a completely frozen financial system. Nobody could access capital. Nobody could get money to run even their simple operations, nevertheless invest in future growth. So everybody was hoarding cash. We saw buyers delay payments. We saw suppliers ask for early payments. And in that environment, something has to give, because if I, as the buyer, am trying to delay payment and you, as the supplier, are trying to get paid earlier, the money has to come from somewhere. And that's where some of these supply chain financing tools come in, because they allow an injection of liquidity from outside to make that relationship better. So we saw demand for fintech tools, supply chain finance tools, reverse factoring tools increased dramatically. Some of the companies that offer these services were reporting 80 to 100% increases year over year for those months, and it only grew from then on. So we definitely saw a big storm on liquidity. Everybody was trying to get finance because there was so much uncertainty in the economy that everybody wanted to be as well prepared as they could be.
And you mentioned at length here liquidity. You mentioned also new tools for accounts payable, accounts receivable, inventory, and planning. Do you sense that when your paper, I get the sense in your paper that the organization needs to provide equal emphasis in all those areas in order for there be some kind of resiliency in the supply chain financing when you're dealing with crises such as a pandemic?
Absolutely, and you need to really come back to these three flows of the supply chain: product flows, and we're very good at product flows, information flows, and also the flow of finances. Everything has to be in balance. Now, it's a complicated and complex matter, but that's what makes supply chain management fun too.
Okay, what are let's say there are two lessons that businesses can take from the recent crisis in order to mitigate the negative impact of a black swan event like a pandemic in the future?
Well, it's good to be in the supply chain world right now, because we finally have received the attention that we thought that we always deserved. In the last year, you've seen more articles mention the term supply chain management than probably the 10 years before, and that is a good thing, because there are a lot more eyes on us and what the profession brings to the overall value of a company. No company can exist without a supply chain. So that's number one. There's more attention on that. And number two, it also points to the fact that as a discipline, we're finally understanding sort of our full reach. And it's not just in terms of traditionally supply chain was viewed as a cost center. I think we have proven that by ensuring availability, it is a competitive weapon that we can wield. And that we can also contribute to the financial well-being of a company. So that's also important to realize, where we're not just saving people money, we're also making people money.
Okay, and my last question, What are two constructive steps that firms can do today with its supply chain financing?
Well, the first one is to really think about how companies can use their supply chain to fund the organization. So it's obviously a self-serving tool, but also how can a company fund their supply chain? And sometimes that is necessary to make sure that your suppliers are healthy. And that's why we define supply chain financing, using the organization to fund the supply chain and using the supply chain to fund the organization. And it's this symbiotic give and take to make sure we're not just making our company better off, but also we're making the supply chain better off.
Okay, well, Rudi, thank you for your time. So I want to encourage our viewers to check out the new article our new paper, I should say, that Rudi co-authored. Again, the title is Supply Chain Financing and Pandemic, Managing Cash Flows to Keep Firms and Their Value Networks Healthy. It'll be available in the recent upcoming issue of the Rutgers Business Review. Rudi, I want to thank you for your time today.
Thank you so much, Eric.